My books that I've read in the Great American Read, number 17 is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin, a seven-book series started in 1996 and currently still ongoing. Now, let's get this out of the way. Everyone knows this series now because it was the inspiration for HBO's big hit show, Game of Thrones. Well, I started reading this series a couple years before that show was announced. So, yes, I am proud to say I was one of the people who was reading this story before it was cool. And what a story it is. And it's just a whole bunch of different things that could easily carry their own book, just all slammed together. And seeing the ways they all bounce off each other, often to the great detriment of everyone involved, is quite a ride the whole way through so far. And yes, I am one of those people who actually likes books 4 and 5 for the most part. But before we get to that, the way this story is put together does make perfect sense if you know about George R. R. Martin's writing history. He started out in the 70s with books and then he moved into TV. But the real problem with that was he could never make the jump to actually considering the practicalities of filming the stuff he wrote. So if they tried to do stuff the way he wrote it, it would go horribly over budget, and they kept having to rein him in. And finally, he just said, "Okay, I'll just go back to writing books because that's easier. There's no budget to worry about. The only limit is your own imagination." And what he came up with is this huge, monstrous story that just keeps getting bigger with each book, and you can just feel the glee he has in not having to rein himself in the slightest bit. Now, in some ways, that is kind of something he's been shackled by because it has led to the series ballooning up. It was originally supposed to be just 3 books, and now it's going to be 7 if he actually ever finishes the last 2. But on that note, as someone who has actually finished a novel myself, I do have to say all these people complaining about him, saying he needs to put out the next book now, like keep writing every spare second he has in his life. You guys need to shut up because unless you've gone through it, you don't know the effort it takes to actually get things down and keep working at it and editing and revising until you're happy with what you have and you're absolutely sure you can send it out into the world to be like devoured by the unforgiving masses and either accepted or rejected. You don't know. You can't. So just that's how I feel about that. And luckily, for the most part, the waits have been worth it with these things. And he can take as long as he wants for the next ones, as far as I'm concerned. Even if he does end up dying before he finishes this, I would rather have it unfinished and be able to imagine a good ending than have him just rush out some crap just so he can say he did it. But this series is very much a bunch of power games between huge families. There's a cast of literally thousands, and it's something of a major life decision to pick these things up and start reading them, even more than the show itself might lead you to believe. Because unlike TV, you don't even have faces and voices to hang on to while you're struggling to get hold of these characters. And this was even before The Wire came along and made that kind of thing more popular. So he was kind of out of his mind to try to be attempting this, but it paid off and it's really popular. And I just love so much of it. There are a couple questionable decisions later down the line, but I do have the trust built up that Martin knows what he's doing because in this series and a lot of his other writing, he has shown he has genuine talent at this and he knows the human reaction in nature and how characters would respond to things and how you can like just send these people ping ponging off each other in different combinations to keep things fresh. And it's always something that's a bit tricky to do, and I understand why more writers don't do it because you're risking a lot if it doesn't work. And like it's a lot easier to just hang things on one or two good characters that people will pay attention to. But for what Martin tried, and I do admire the sheer scope of what he has pulled off here. It is quite a thing to witness, and it's something that if you're into stuff like Harry Potter, then you want to give this a try when you're ready for something that's more the grown-up version of that, because it is something that makes you work to understand it. But if you are willing to put in the effort, it is very rewarding and even better than the show, which has its good points and bad points for me, but the good mostly outweighs the bad. And I'm interested to see how it ends, especially because it may be the only ending to the story we ever get. Even still, it probably won't be quite the one that I would end up imagining for the books themselves, even discounting all the alterations they've made, which I do have to say are mostly for the worst, and I won't give away how, but just read the books for yourselves if you're curious. If you are the kind of person who's into the show in the first place, you probably are willing to put in the effort to memorize all this stuff, and you have a leg up on the rest of us who just went into this without any actors to keep in mind for this thing. So you'll have an easier time, and you'll find it's definitely worth the wait, however long it is, for the next ones. And that is all for this one. I cannot recommend it enough if it is the kind of thing you'd be interested in, and that is a big if, of course, but it works for me. Up next, one of the great children's literature creators of all time shows all these modern dystopian wannabe young adults writers how it's done with The Giver.